Hi, my name is Lise Voldeng. The Future Now show explores the world we live in. Some of our topics may seem challenging to face, but we believe that facing challenges honestly is what allows us to overcome them, to build solutions that address them, allowing us to build a better world for ourselves and for our planet. The Future Now show is presented by the international think tank Club of Amsterdam. Our next topic is presented by Schloer.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, let's go right into it. Observing the news of the last 6 months very carefully, we can see a strong trend which began to become very significant in 2010, is accelerating sense even more. It is the social uprising of cultures, groups, tribes, or ethnic heritage to redefine the land they occupy by challenging or just ignoring borders or territories of sovereign countries as our world map of nations define them. Examples for this are the Arab Spring movements in the Middle East, specifically now also the movement of ISIS, but also the intensifying impasse between Israel and the Palestinians over their occupied land. The various examples in northern and sub-Sahara Africa, the Russia-Ukraine situation, and a growing list of other emerging examples elsewhere in the world. Asia, for example, South America, everywhere. So the question we should ask ourselves here is, will the definition and institution of sovereign countries or nations, as we defined them mostly in the 20th century, survive this in the intensity and quantity accelerating trend? Do we see a new world order emerging, which is arranged once again around tribal and fundamental social groups and not around borders of modern nations as we drew them in a map? Are we going back in time, possibly to a more natural equilibrium arranged around cultures and history of who we share land and resources? Is this the beginning of World War III, the global war of social unrest and social redefinition? These are very provoking questions. We should start today to think about them as the emerging trend is supporting these questions. And that's my topic.
Hardy, thank you. I have a question for everyone, and I'd like to start, Hardy, with asking it of you, and then Arjen and Kirsten, if you can go next. Hardy, as you and I agree, we are in the early stages of a rather massive revolution, arguably what we would call a global war, World War III, really depending entirely on our actions, how we choose to respond to what's happening now. Agree that the world is a tinderbox awaiting deeper ignition, with even a single trigger, such as an impact, a global economic one, for an example, blowing the whole thing up in ways that, similar to the environment, once we reach that apex of stress, this system just goes haywire. So we have a planet going haywire on multiple levels. That being the case, moving away from the doom and gloom of it, how do you suggest we soften these triggers to avoid an escalation of that kind of global war and large-scale loss of life?
I think one of the problems is, and I probably will be flamed for saying this now, but I think one of the problems that we have created in this world is democracy. Democracy is a system of polarization. And you can look at every democracy we see around the world. It takes so long, and eventually, as you can see, for example, in the United States right now, eventually everything is going to be divided in two camps. And strangely enough, these two camps are almost identical size. And all they do is they warfare with each other over their minute differences in dogma, while they're missing all the big picture. What we need in this world is a system of consensus, Not where we split everyone in half, but where 90% of the people can agree on something. And we cannot do it by pinning one nation against another, but we have to do it by bringing all nations together. And in fact, borders don't help. Borders are only emphasizing on the division between people. In the age of globalization, and we are in that age, we must come together as one people on this planet and solve all of our problems together as one people. And unless we understand that, and unless we are willing to do that, these problems will get worse. So I believe that over the next 10 years, we will go through very, very difficult times. I think people will not understand what the obvious solution is until things get significantly worse. And only when they get so bad that everyone's pain that is inflicted by these mistakes is so high that everyone is willing to think outside the box and come up with new ideas and let things go in a more humane way. Until then, it will get worse. And that's just the way it is.
Arjen?
I think I have to agree with Hardy. I think we have, a few examples. For instance, Germany in the 20th century, where they, went all the way down into hell, nearly utterly destroyed their own society, and then at the end came out of it. But they had to go down very, very far, and then it took them a couple of decades to learn actually from that very, very horrible process. Now that was in the 1940s, when compared to today, our weapons were, fairly crude and simple and not so powerful. For now, the Western world to go through such a process again to learn the lesson that we should have learned 70 years ago is going to be disproportionately more painful and more damaging, not just to individual people who will be on the receiving end of the weapons, but also to the ecosystem that, every dollar we spend on building expensive weapons that don't do any good, we're not using on solving the other problems that we were discussing previously. So again, it just sort of exacerbates all the other stuff. And if I just look at sort of Western foreign policy of the last decade plus, there seems to be an utter divorce from facts, essentially. So we start wars in countries that are not a threat to us. They then actually lead to those countries becoming so unstable that then they may become a threat to us. And then that is a reason to create even more conflict with those countries. Now, I agree with Hardy that we should be, striving for different methods. But of course, the problem is the people who are interested in these conflicts seem to be quite happy to have these conflicts. So people call the Iraq War a disaster, but if you are General Electric or Boeing or Raytheon Missile Systems, then actually, it was a giant bonus fest, right? So it all depends on your perspective. Now, most of us aren't General Electric or Raytheon, but it seems to be that the people who make some of these decisions, who influence the process, seem to be quite happy with the way things are going. And until that changes, which, probably requires some sort of revolutionary type change, which itself is a messy process, I don't see that that's going to change. Even now, after we've been lied into so many wars over the last 12 years, we're now again, most of us in the West are believing what the Western governments are telling us about Russia, when actually, it's quite doubtful that any of that is factually correct. And I'm not saying that because I think Putin is a nice guy. I'm just saying because I know for a fact that Western governments lie as much as any others.
I would like to hear from Kirsten first.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add what Arjen said. I'm not sure what it's worrying for sure, and it's like a lot of intense things happening. I was reading an article that I thought was interesting to add to this. That also the way we experience it, and like the fact that we are talking about information, about wrong, lies, what type of information, and how we spread unrest has been changed as well a lot. So we using Twitter feed, we are using YouTube movies to influence, in that sense, new social groups that I think is on one hand making the conflicts intense and more uncontrolled, and on the other hand, we as audience also experience the unrest differently than in the past.
I agree. I would liken it to be to being part of a body that you're just becoming aware has other limbs. You know, we're so entrained to only be aware of our own needs and in our own environment. We have this world that we now are engaging with. We have these tools that allow us to connect instantaneously, very difficult to disconnect from in certain ways. It's a living consciousness, and there are those who are very good at using those tools to the benefit of others and to the murder of others. You know, when we realize that we're one people on one planet and are able to come together in a spirit of cooperation, we can do anything. If even a few of us are doing that, we can do anything. But as long as there's this cloak of something else on us, our thought, our programming, what it is to be me, what it is to be you, it's very difficult to deal with any of these things, I think. Would anyone else like to offer some closing thoughts?
Well, I once asked a group of administrators from big Dutch educational institutions what they thought the mission of their organizations was. And for people watching in the rest of the world, these are all completely tax-funded tertiary educational institutions, colleges, universities. And there were about 90 of these senior administrators together in a room with me talking about the future. And I asked them, well, what is it that your institutions do? What is your mission? And they had to think about that for quite a while, which was interesting in itself. And then one of the old gray men in the back of the room stood up and explained it to me, that they thought that they were producing workers for Dutch companies. And he literally used those words. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that tells you a lot about what education apparently in the minds of the people running the institution is for. It's not to raise young human beings into wise citizens that can, you know, go into the world and do some stuff. It's to literally, what do they use? Produce workers.
But there's also a disconnection between what they think they do and what really happens.
Sure.
Like obviously those kids outside the classrooms and outside the official systems might, what you see also connecting to what Hardy said, like how people understand what's going on, how they feel connected to what's happening in Syria, actually going and moving there to help fight wars because they feel engaged with it. Like the people are activated and like triggered and gain knowledge differently than only from those organizations.
I think this is a very important point you just made, Kirsten, because I have been wondering, because this is obviously right now on the news, that there is about 2,000 people from Europe and the United States that have gone to join ISIS. Why? Why did they do that? And the answer is it's rage against the machine. It's rage against something that is profoundly not working. And I believe one of the very important things that we need to do is that we need to work with educational institutions, especially with business schools, to find a completely new conscience in how we act in this world, how we add value, how do we produce usefulness, how do we look at ourselves, how do we look into the mirror and say, yeah, we did something really good, we did something useful, not just for us, selfish, but for humanity. And that is the last point I want to make. We must begin to think in terms of not me, but us. And unless we think in terms of us, we cannot solve the problems of us. We can only solve the problems of me. And me is not enough. Thank you.
Hardy, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Let's go build a better world.